Hello, I'm Matt Donnelly of RotoBaller, and it's time to talk about those running backs that we are starting for week number 2. I know you've been hurt before. I feel your pain, but we have to learn to love again if we're ever going to have success in these fantasy football streets. Last week, Zamir White, Javonte Williams, Raheem Mostert, they all broke your hearts, and they took a touchdown from Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry to salvage their fantasy seasons. And don't get me started on the beat writers there in San Francisco after having Christian McCaffrey ripped away from us right before kickoff. Trust has to be earned, so you're going to have to learn to trust once again who you can get in your lineup and who you should be avoiding. Well, you know what? It's time to talk through our feelings here in week 2's starts and sits at the running back position. Now, running back that I'm starting this week is Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers as they take on the Indianapolis Colts. Jacobs is the only player that I see with any kind of positive uptick after the fallout from the Jordan Love injury. We know that Malik Willis is not a polished passer, but he can run the ball, so that run-pass option is going to be there, except I don't think they're really going to be worried about defending the pass, but that is for another video, another day. So look for this Packers offense to transition more to a run-heavy approach during Love's absence. Last week, the Colts saw a heavy dose from Joe Mixon and the Texans on the ground to the tune of 30 carries for 159 yards. That's on the ground alone. Mixon, he also played a small part in the passing game with 3 receptions for 19 yards. Now, going back to last season, teams have found a way to produce fantasy points on the ground against this Colts defense. Indianapolis, they allowed the 5th most fantasy points to the running back position a season ago. Even with a poor playing surface there in Brazil and facing a, let's call it what it is, a solid Eagles run defense in terms of fantasy points allowed, Jacobs, he still managed to bust off some big runs there and average 5.3 yards per carry in the process. So hey, I feel good about Jacobs this week. Another running back that I love this week, how about RAndre Stevenson? And you know what, you say it like this, RAndre Stevenson. It has to come from deep down here when you talk about the Patriots running back taking on the Seattle Seahawks. With 25 carries and 120 yards and a touchdown, it's not easy to look past Stevenson anymore. Even more so this week against a Seahawks defensive unit that allowed 138.4 rushing yards and 23.55 fantasy points per game to the running back position last season. The nearly 140 yards on the ground against the Seattle Seahawks defense last season, that was the second most in the league. Now, Seattle, they did do a good job of containing Javonte Williams and this entire Broncos rushing attack to 99 yards last week, but that feels more like an outlier performance. Even if the Seahawks get a piece of RAndre Stevenson, it may not be enough. Of Stevenson's 120 yards on the ground, 118 of them, yes, 118 of them came after contact. And the Patriots back, he forced 12 missed tackles, which was 5 more than any other back last Sunday. Now, last season, Stevenson saw a 60% of the snaps in 9 games and averaged 18.4 fantasy points per game. Stevenson is poised for a tremendous season this week based on what his early usage has been. Not many backs are going to get 25 carries and run 15 routes per game, let alone an 80% snap share that he saw last week. Another running back I feel good about this week, how about Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns as they take on the Jacksonville Jaguars? Ford is that guy that if you're looking for a back that you can trust, especially in PPR formats, he is that guy. Last week against the Dallas Cowboys, Ford hauled in 6 passes for 25 yards and earned 18 fantasy points when he added an additional 44 yards on the ground and that touchdown. Now, the Cleveland Browns, we know that they trust in Ford as he earned an 85.7% of the carries out of that backfield, which is in the same percentile there as Bijan Robinson, Isaiah Pacheco, and James Conner. This is a bell cow type workload from the former Cincinnati Bearcat. For Ford, it is his involvement in the passing game that earns his inclusion on this week's start list. Last season, only Christian McCaffrey had more receiving touchdowns. If the 6 receptions indicate what we can expect moving forward, this is a matchup against the Jaguars that should excite fantasy managers. In week number 1, the Jaguars watched Dolphins running back Devin Achan come out of the backfield and haul in all 7 of his targets for 76 yards. With no other backs on this Browns radar, this is Ford's backfield. Make no mistake about it. And he should continue to excel in the passing game, which is music to fantasy managers' ears. Another big-time performance last week came from J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers. And this week, they're taking on the Carolina Panthers. This is a bonus play for you guys right now. I usually give you 3 starts. I'm giving you 4 this week at the running back position. Dobbins, he showed some burst and a little bit of acceleration against a very good Raiders defense last week, including that 61-yard run late in the contest to push that running total over 130 rushing yards on just 10 attempts. Now, Dobbins, he suffered an ACL tear back in 2021, then Achilles tear in 2023, which would be a death sentence to most running backs. Dobbins was easily the better looking of the 2 Chargers backs and should earn more touches moving forward. Now, I do have some concerns as the season goes on here when it comes to Dobbins, because I am old enough to remember when Cam Akers was looking this good coming off his Achilles tear, only to lose his job to Kyren Williams shortly after. Now, my sits of the week, guys who may be losing their jobs sooner rather than later. How about Chuba Hubbard of the Panthers as they take on that Chargers team? This is probably on us. We started getting excited. We started feeling good about this Carolina Panthers offense. They went into New Orleans and self-destructed. I get it. This game was over before the first quarter came to a conclusion, but when Miles Sanders has more rushing yards than you do, that is not a good sign. Hubbard had just 6 touches, all carries for just 14 yards. Meanwhile, Miles Sanders not only had more yards, but also had more opportunities. Despite Hubbard playing 10 more snaps, Sanders ran 7 more routes. This is not a thing I want to see from Chuba Hubbard, who's supposed to be a good pass-catching back. This week, Hubbard and the Panthers, they host this Chargers defense that just allowed 71 yards on the ground to Zamir White and Alexander Mattison. Carolina, for their part last week, they turned the ball over on 3 separate occasions, while the Chargers defense, they forced 3 turnovers themselves. Doing some quick math, that doesn't look good for the Carolina Panthers this week. Now, another running back that I'm sitting is Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Detroit Lions. Last season, the Detroit Lions were one of those teams you simply didn't start backs against in fantasy. They allowed just 15.45 fantasy points per game to the position per contest. That trend, it continued here in 2024. Kyren Williams, yes, he did find the end zone, but guess what? The Rams, backs, they managed just 66 yards on 20 carries and only 4 yards on 3 receptions. As for White's situation, it is not as bleak as, say, Chuba Hubbard's, but it's not great either. White had just 15 carries for 31 yards against Commanders. Meanwhile, his backfield partner churned out 62 yards on just 9 attempts. Expect Bucky Irvin's role to continue to grow this week and throughout the season as he continues to prove to be the more efficient back. White, he's going to continue to be featured in the passing game. We saw him hauling 6 passes there for 75 yards. However, going back to last season, the Lions were the only team not to surrender a receiving score to the running back position. Now finally, another guy I'm sitting is Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos against the Pittsburgh Steelers. From the fantasy penthouse to the fantasy football outhouse, such is the life of an NFL running back, and hell have no fury like the scorn of a fantasy manager. Last week, in what was supposed to be a great matchup, I talked Javonte Williams up. I believed in Javonte Williams. He was a non-factor, registering just 8 carries for 23 yards there and hauling in just 1 of his 2 targets. That reception, it wasn't even for a yard. I couldn't even get a yard out of him in the passing game. What I should have done is file a missing persons report when it came to Williams. I'm unsure if he's banged up or in Sean Payton's doghouse, but what I do know is Jaleel McLaughlin out-touched him 15-9. Now diving further into this Broncos backfield situation, Williams, he got 36 snaps. McLaughlin, he would finish with 24, and Audric Estime, he spelled him on 3 snaps. If Williams and McLaughlin are going to combine for 51 yards on 24 touches against the Seattle Seahawks, how are they going to handle TJ Watt and the Steelers this week? It's a fade. Get out of there. After allowing 118.6 rushing yards and nearly 30 fantasy points per game to backs last season, the Steelers, they are finally healthy and put on display last week what running backs do not want to see at all. In that contest, the Steelers held Bijan Robinson to just 3.8 yards per carry on his 18 attempts. Now Robinson, he did finish with 5 receptions and an additional 43 yards, but no one's going to mistake Javonte Williams for BJ Robinson anytime soon. But what you should be doing real soon is heading over to RotoBaller.com. What are you waiting for? Get all your fantasy football news and analysis right there. One-stop shop for all those needs that you have. And of course, head over to the RotoBaller Discord channel. Find out where I'm at. I'm there answering your questions every single day of the week.